Welcome to the Suicide Monk Podcast, a platform dedicated to fostering open and honest conversations about the deeply sensitive and complex topic of suicide. Before we delve into the narratives and discussions presented here, it's important to emphasize that we are not medical professionals, therapists, or counselors. We do not possess the qualifications to offer clinical advice or treatment. Instead, the Suicide Monk podcast serves as a safe space for individuals to share their personal stories and experiences, all while preserving their anonymity. We encourage our guests to tell their stories anonymously, recognizing that privacy and anonymity can be crucial for those who wish to share their experiences without fear of judgment or exposure. Our mission is to create a supportive community, raise awareness, and promote understanding, all while emphasizing that seeking professional help is crucial when dealing with mental health issues and suicidal thoughts. If you or someone you know is in crisis, please reach out to a mental health professional or contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 for immediate assistance. Together, the Suicide Monk podcast aims to break the stigma surrounding mental health and let those who are struggling know they are not alone.
Welcome to the Suicide Monk Podcast. I am your host, and today we are going to be speaking with Anne. She's going to be joining us as our guest speaker. Today she's going to be talking about a couple things that has happened to her, two suicides in her life, and so she became a widow and a mother of 5, and it's a story of strength and resilience and pain and the ability to move forward. Again, if you'd like to be a guest on our show and tell your story, we'd be happy to have you. Just shoot me an email at thesuicidemonk@gmail.com. Thanks. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Anne.
Anne.
Yeah.
I like that. What's my grandmother's name?
Mine
a good
too.
woman. Really?
Yes.
Yeah, good woman. Yeah. So, tell me a little bit about yourself. Give me a little background on who you are. Do you know what the podcast is about?
I do know what the podcast is about.
Okay.
Background information. I'm a 35-year-old widow. Been widowed for 4.5 years, and I have 5 kids. My first experience with suicide was when I was 17, and my brother committed suicide over the spring break of my senior year in school.
Your brother?
Yes. And then my second experience with suicide was June 4th, 2019, when my husband committed suicide.
Wow, you've had a run of it. That's something else. That's I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So that was 4.5 years ago when your brother was 17?
I was 17. My brother was 24.
Brother was 24. Wow, I wasn't expecting that. Sorry. Really, that's terrible. What can you tell me a little bit about your childhood and maybe a little bit about your brother first?
Sure. I was raised Mormon, and I grew up in suburban Aurora, Colorado. I was number 5 of 7 children, and I guess my childhood is a little murky, and that goes into another dimension of my life. But to a degree, there was some religious abuse, and to a degree, there was, a much larger degree, there was verbal and emotional abuse. And so, can't say that I grew up in a loving family from my parents, or that my siblings and I were raised to love each other and to express love. So
So,
that's another thing.
yeah.
Um, my brother, my brother, was 7 years older than me, and when he graduated high school, he went straight into the Marines, and he loved that. Um, but uh, so he made it through basic training in California, and then he was in tech school in Virginia to be a mechanic. And he had this he had this problem with his legs. He was a runner and a cyclist, and he had this problem with his legs where he couldn't sit for extended periods of time. Like he needed to be mobile and move, and
Oh, wow.
sitting in school was difficult. So like all the time sitting in school for the tech school built up like pressure or inflammation or something in his calf muscles. And so it was a thing that would periodically have to be like just surgically released. And that was just a simple procedure of like slitting the sides of the leg and letting it out. I don't remember exactly.
Right,
I
right.
was,
Some sort of drainage.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but then there's the recovery time afterwards. And so the Marines didn't want to put up with that and they gave him a medical discharge.
Right.
Um, like that kind of unraveled his world. Um, all he wanted to do was be a Marine. And, um, he graduated in like 1999, I think, something like that. So he was discharged right before September 11th.
Oh,
And then there's all the military ramp up. And so, like, he was sitting there he was sitting with his roommates watching the TV, watching the news at that time, seeing everything go on, and was immediately calling recruiting offices trying to get back in. And they were like, there's no way in hell. You got a medical discharge. We're not taking you back.
right, right.
Um, but that's all he wanted to do. And, um, so he was maybe like 20 at that point. Um, for my experience and for my siblings and my parents, none of us understood, none of us had any inclination as to his mental health. Um, so I like, if this was a prolonged thought process for him, um,
You didn't know.
I didn't know.
Nobody knew.
No, it wasn't something that he talked to us about. Um, it it completely blindsided all of us. We did not see this coming. He had just been at a hockey game that night um, with my brother, who's a year and a half older than. So my brother who died is Brent, um, and he had been at a hockey game that night with my with our older brother and a couple of our cousins and his girlfriend. And um, apparently there had been a bit of a fight after the hockey game or during the hockey game, some guys hitting on my brother's girlfriend, and he didn't like that. So he was standing up against that, and she didn't like that because it was causing a scene and drama. And so, how things go. Um, so, um, but my older brother had even said, like, that Brent had indicated, hey, just kind of save this date for next year. She and I are talking about getting married. So like there was absolutely no indication or anything. And so then he and his girlfriend went back to her apartment and
So he was actually making plans for the future.
he was
Okay, that generally doesn't happen.
right.
So,
So like, he and his girlfriend continued to argue about things, um, in the car, and they sat in the parking lot for a while in front of her apartment, and at one point she said, "I'm done," and she went inside to her apartment. Um, and then several hours later at, like, I don't know, 1 or 2 in the morning, some early morning hour, she looked out her apartment window and his car was still in the parking lot, and she thought that was weird, so she went out to check on him and found him dead. He had a gun in his glove compartment, and that wasn't a normal thing for him, except on camping or fishing trips, and he had just gotten back from one. So, for us logically piecing things together and just trying to imagine and empathize with what his thought processes might have been, was just, if she said she was done and he interpreted that as she's done with the relationship instead of done with the argument. Um, and he had a bit of an impulsive nature, and
That's quite an impulse.
it's quite an impulse.
Yeah.
But, if it had been a previous struggle and he thought that things were done and that was his thing that he was looking forward to and felt like it's just been taken away from him, then fuck it.
Yeah. Yep. Wow. What were you able to talk to her after
Yeah.
everything? And
Yeah, we were all supportive of her, made sure that we all communicated and expressed to her that, like, nobody considered that she was in any way to blame,
right.
because, that was a quick thought of ours, was, how is she internalizing this? Is she blaming herself for this? Because this is not something that anybody should be blamed for.
Right.
This is nobody else's issue.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it is the choice that
Right.
he made.
Exactly.
Um, wow. I tend to get shocked in these conversations, and
Yeah,
I'm not
it
usually
happens.
very shocked about stuff, so but please keep going.
Um,
How did
processing like processing that was difficult for me. Like, it was such a shock, and it was the first time to experience somebody close dying to me that was not a grandparent whose time was rightly
right?
there.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, I lost it, and I wasn't even that close to him. Out of seven kids, there's definitely degrees of closeness and relationships between siblings, and he and I weren't overly close. 7 years apart, and just, I mean, I wasn't he was close with the youngest, because, everybody just dotes on the baby.
Right.
Um, that's different complex there. But, um, like, it was it was a big shock to me. Um, I had a hard time watching any movies with any degree of violence. I dated boyfriends that enjoyed guns recreationally, and that was problematic for me, especially if they wanted to, like, go to the shooting range. I'm like, "You're talking to the wrong person. I
Right.
can't touch that."
Yeah.
Um, Going off to college, and, um, like, I had a little fish tank of with a beta and a couple of ghost shrimp in it on my dresser. And didn't like the pet store said that those two were supposed to be compatible tank mates together.
Right.
It's a lie. Um, the beta will kill anything.
They do.
So that was a lie. But the way that played out for me was that like sometimes I'd come home and like just find the ghost shrimp like stuck on the lid of the tank. And it was just a small little box, like 6 inches across, 4 inches deep, maybe. And like, okay, that's weird. I don't know what's going on. And then one day I came home and I had forgotten to put the lid on the tank. And um, there was a ghost shrimp on, I don't know if it was on the dresser top or if it was on the floor, but it was out of the tank, out of the water. And I lost it. Like I was hyperventilating, screaming that something was dying in my room. And I could not handle that, especially knowing that that shrimp jumped out.
Right.
So like that was a that was a good PTSD trigger for me of this fucking water animal is committing suicide. What the hell is going on? um so like it shook me for a long time. And I mean, I think when I was still in high school, I had like one conversation with my school counselor. Um, but nobody ever said, "Hey, maybe you should have some solid therapy for this."
Right.
Nobody ever said that. They were just like, "Oh, sorry, you've got a thing to grieve." That's it.
It's a little more than grieving.
Right.
How do you grieve somebody that's supposed to love you and they take their life
Um,
and take that love away from you, or that experience of?
yeah. So,
So you really didn't do any therapy or anything for that?
no. No, I didn't. Um, and it kind of changed my behavior in high school too. Of um, like I had already had something. Uh, I had already had a bit of a family shock the year before that just kind of changed me from an academic mindset to what does this even matter anyway, you know? And then after my brother, I was really just like, I mean, there's only 2 months left of school. Who gives a fuck? Who cares? What is this? None of this matters.
Right.
I mean, I was graduating in 3 years. So I was graduating in 3 years. I was in AP classes and honor classes, and I was typically like ranging 3.2 to 3.5 GPA. Um, never a straight A student. Never cared enough about that. And I just was like, fuck it. None of it matters. None of this matters.
So your brother's death kind of took you that direction,
Yeah.
and the suppression and not being able to talk about it, obviously. Um,
Not being offered to talk about it.
yeah. Well, yeah. There's that.
Like in my mind, it didn't cross my mind that I should have therapy. Like that simply wasn't a concept.
Right.
Like,
You're kind of in a constant shock state, so you don't think about things that will
right. But I'm
help
going to
you.
say, like, culturally too, for me, therapy that wasn't a thing.
That's fair.
So if, you know, if therapy had been something normalized before that shock, then maybe I would have been in a place to say, I need therapy. But it wasn't something normalized, it wasn't something accessible, so it didn't cross my mind at this time that this is how I need to heal now. Like, somebody died, somebody killed himself, and now that's put my mind in a state that needs help healing.
Right.
That just wasn't a concept.
How did your parents deal with it?
Um,
Did they change towards each other?
I don't know that they changed toward each other. They were much more clingy to me. Um, like, I was a senior with a driver's license, and they panicked if I was driving 45 minutes away. Nope, you can't do that by yourself. I'm going with you. Nope, you can't go to your uncle's house. Um, like I had I had a church trip to Utah planned already, and they wanted to restrict me from that, and I was like I need to go somewhere. I need to move. I need to breathe. You can't take this away from me. So I had to fight to still get to go do that trip, and then I had aunts and uncles that were living in Utah, and they were like, "Hey, you know what? You can stay with us." And this was immediately after my brother's death, before the funeral, because it was still over my spring break. Um,
Oh, wow.
so um,
So you
you
needed
know,
to get the hell out of Dodge.
I did.
Okay.
Um, and that's kind of a thing that is me. When shit hits the fan, I gotta go somewhere.
Right.
Um, like I just run away. I'm a runner. Um, so so I already had this spring break trip to Utah planned and convinced my parents, you still have to let me go do this. And then had an uncle say, "Hey, why don't you just stay with me for a couple of days instead of returning with the group? And then you can just ride with us when we're driving out for the funeral." And my parents were like, "No, you can't do that. You need to come back. We need you here." And I was like, "But I need space away. I knew that I needed time to process without having necessarily that vocabulary to communicate
Right.
that.
Right.
But I knew that. And um so so I felt like them telling me, when internally I had reactions for how I needed to handle this grief and how I needed to go through it, and they're restricting that. And they were doing their best. I know that they weren't being assholes. Um, as a parent having lost a child, I think I'd want to keep my kids close too.
Oh, yeah.
And especially in those fresh days. And anyway, but all I wanted to do was be away. And so, so I feel like um, that experience, or this other time that, you know, weeks later I was having an emotional burst and crying in my room, and mentioned to one of my church youth leaders that I was having a hard time. And she was like, "Well, what if I just come get you and take you out for a bit? Like, Walmart's open 24/7. We can just go there and walk around. We don't need to do anything or buy anything. I'll just take you somewhere so that you can get out of it a bit." And asked my parents. They said no. And so things like that stuck in my head, so that I'm going to say when it was replay, when my husband committed suicide, um, and it all my brain was like, "Okay, well, we've been through this. We know how to do this. So let's just do it again." But this time I had 5 kids. So any little thing that they asked, I said yes to. You need to go spend the night at your aunt's house for a couple nights? That's fine. Go ahead.
Right.
You need to go on a shopping trip with your aunt? Go ahead, that's fine. Anything, I don't care what it is. Anything you ask me is a yes because they were so small. My oldest was 9 and my youngest was 3, and I've got 5 kids. So, you know, whatever ages they fell into in between at that time of year, um, they don't know how to talk about it. They don't know how to process it. They don't know how to understand it. So just whatever you're thinking and feeling and whatever you need to do, yes,
Right. Yeah.
because I know what it feels like to be told no. So yes, anything you need is a yes.
Yeah. You kind of needed somebody to walk alongside you. Sounds like your parents didn't really allow that because of their own, well, because of insecurities, natural
Yeah,
insecurities.
insecurities and their own inability to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they've got to deal with their grief and then your grief.
Right.
And they
And
don't know how to do either.
they don't know. Yeah. Their limited capacity for understanding and, coming from an era where really nobody talked about their feelings.
Right.
You just stuffed that shit
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
And there was absolutely no therapy. There was absolutely no um, help for things. So,
What about church wise? Did they approach it with, because I know the Mormons aren't much different than, say, the regular Christians, whatever they would call them. I don't know. Because you got the Jehovah's Witnesses, you got Mormons, you got the
non
Christian,
denominational Christians and
non-denominational. So,
Catholics and anything
so in,
Judeo Christian based.
yeah, so like a non-denominational or contemporary Christian would, well, it's prayer. It's all prayer.
Right.
Pray
Yeah.
about it. Pray it all away.
Yeah. Um, yeah.
And
I mean, that was basically, there was a lot of leaning into that of prayer and scriptures and go to church um, and do all of that. Um,
and was that effective for you at all?
yeah, I'm gonna say it was because I was taught and trained to believe that, and um, so I was conditioned and habituated into that. Um, did any of it help me process the trauma and PTSD, or did it just calm me down in the meantime? It didn't. I don't feel like it helped me process the death
It,
and the trauma and the PTSD. It was it was just a I mean, it really I'm going to say that it brought some comfort, it brought some peace, my belief did. Um, but it still didn't necessarily psychologically help me.
right. It didn't solve.
Right.
It didn't solve
It
the
didn't
puzzle,
solve the
basically.
puzzle that then came back as PTSD triggers later.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Hmm. You said something earlier. You said you weren't really close to your brother, but it's definitely, well, number one, it's blood.
Right.
Um, but when it's a sibling parent, it'll profoundly affect you regardless of your relationship.
Yeah.
I
I
think.
mean,
It's my theory.
there's a hole in the family.
Yeah.
There's a person missing from family gatherings. There's a person missing in family photos.
Yeah.
There's a person missing at my graduation.
Yeah.
And then there's an uncle missing for my kids when I got to that stage of my life. And watching them go through stages and thinking, "Oh, that's like him." And they don't know him, and he doesn't get to know them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the things that
That's okay.
um yeah, I have to pause here. So we're talking about, there's the absence.
The absence, and that it comes back in waves and different stages at different times in your life. It
Never really goes away, does
never
it?
really goes away. Like, I don't know the last time that I had a Brent episode, as I used to call them, um, because I didn't have a term for a trigger or like PTSD was not part of my self-awareness either. So I called them episodes. And so I honestly don't know the last time I had one. But even last summer, I was in North Dakota in a winery, and the winery owner um, also does art. And he has, like, his walls are covered in paintings that he's done of pictures that he finds on Google. He just finds celebrities or movie scenes or characters or anything that have like very expressive faces in that moment. And I saw Brad Pitt from
Is that a river runs through it?
That Is a River Runs Through It.
Yeah, it's a great picture.
It is. It's a fantastic picture. It's such an expression of joy and mischief. And that character has always been my brother to me. And interestingly, the second character in that movie, the second brother, is also my second brother. Like, their physical appearances matched my brother's, and the love of fishing and the love of Montana. My brother had lived in Montana as a fly fishing tour guide. I mean, like,
wow.
I could not tell you how somebody matched my brother's personality for that movie so down to the detail of the fishing and the sloughing off of schoolwork and the falling into drinking and alcoholism. I can't say that Brent was an alcoholic, but
He ventured down the
he
road.
drank. Yeah, he did. He never backed down from a fight. And then he was like, there was another feature. Oh, the shooting the chutes, that scene where they like take somebody's boat and they're like, yeah, let's run down the rapids and ride this down. Like, there was this time that my brother snowboarded off of his roof of the house that he was living in with like a bunch of roommates, or and then with a broken collarbone after that, and he wasn't supposed to be moving. What the hell did he do but put on some rollerblades in the house and take a fall down the stairs and re-break the collarbone? Like, it was just always something. In the Marines, like, he had a collapsed lung because he got into a bar fight with Army guys over who's better, because that's what Army and Marine guys do.
Right.
And so like, so yeah, I saw that painting on the wall and I was like, well, obviously I have to walk away with this. So,
Yeah.
so, yeah, people see that painting, in my room and they're like, so Brad Pitt? Nope, it's not about Brad.
Not about Brad.
It's not about Brad. That is not Brad Pitt. That's Polly. And that's my brother. So, yeah. So I guess that was my latest episode was that, but it wasn't like, it wasn't a trigger. It was just a moment of connection.
Yeah. Yep. That's good.
Yeah.
That's actually a positive thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's hard. I want to ask questions about him, but without having knowledge of his thought process, it's really hard to know what was going on
Well,
and
you
for
can
how
ask
long.
questions, and if I can answer it, I can answer it.
Well, you don't know how long it went on.
That's okay. Sure. Stuff like
Yeah,
that. Nope.
yeah.
No idea.
So we're kind of stuck in time there, honestly.
Yeah. I
Because you
mean,
can't answer questions that you don't have answers to
mhm.
from him. And then not having the knowledge, like me, I'm just a dark person. People know I'm like on it all
Yeah.
the time. So it's like, and I'm not shy about who I am. So
Yeah.
they generally know what the hell's going on with me, even in the darkness, because it's just so much pressure on me.
Yeah.
The internal pressure that I feel, if I don't release it, I lose my mind. Like I just anger, rage, darkness just overshadows my whole life. And um, I'd be interested. Maybe we have, maybe we can understand a little bit more about your husband's thought process.
I know a hell of a lot more about that.
Yeah, I would imagine because he's, you have more intimacy. You're going to see the darkness. You're in there. You walk with him daily.
Yeah.
So it's right in your face. But so where at in the story are we? Like,
Well, if we want to move past Brent and just transition into,
well, we can, but I'd like you to talk about that. I mean, that's important.
well, it is. And
So if you have more to add to that, please do. I don't have many questions because I wasn't
because I
prepared for
can't.
them.
Yeah. Well, yes, I know. I know.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
you weren't
That's
prepared for
okay.
that. I don't know. We may have.
How did this affect your siblings? Any relationship changes with your siblings? Did it profoundly
I don't
change
feel
them?
like it affected us internally as a sibling group. I feel like everybody still had um, their own processing of it. Like I mentioned my youngest sister was the closest with him. And
And how old was she at the time?
12.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's tough.
So, they considered each other their best friends. And so they were very tightly knit and tightly bound. And she also did not go through any therapy for it. So
Do you
that
think she knew about some of the things he was going through? Probably not. She was
no,
so young.
yeah, she was young. She was, he was 24, she was 12. It was more just like taking care of the cute baby sister and having cute little fun
Right.
dates
Yeah.
kind of a thing. It wasn't so much that he divulged his
Right. The emotional
yeah,
depth wasn't there for
right.
conversation.
Yeah. Um no, just best buddies.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So
How
I
is
know that
she?
she's mentioned to me that it really hit her hard and she had a hard time with um processing that and having essentially no help for it. Um
So kind of the same situation as you, just younger
but younger and to a greater degree because
because of the
because of
closeness.
the
Yeah.
closeness of the relationship, yeah. So
How old is she now? She's
30.
30 now.
Mhm.
And you guys don't talk about this.
Well, she and I kind of quit our relationship about 4 years ago. So,
Okay.
um, we don't talk.
Okay. Okay.
We don't talk. We don't see each other.
Yeah.
We kind of take shifts with family gatherings, as in she goes to one and I go to one.
Right.
And it's not like she and I coordinate that, it's that the other family members coordinate that so that there's
No animosity.
yeah.
What happened? Can I ask that? I mean, you don't have
Sure.
to divulge.
Sure. She
Because this is about the same time as your husband, right?
It was right after, yes.
Okay.
So, like, she and I were close during that time, and she was supportive and helpful for me in the couple weeks after the suicide, and then so the suicide was in June 2019, and then August I flew out to Orlando to help her pack up her apartment and drive her across the country because she was moving to Salt Lake. And um so, I did that 2 months after a big traumatic event in my life, and my mom and other sister took 4 of my kids and I took 1 because she was closely bonded with my sister, and I would never hear the end of that hell if I had gone without her. So we went, and then because she had just moved, um, she wasn't able to help with some setup days at the Denver Gem Show. And I had previously met the owners of the show the year before when I went to visit her working there. And so they said, well, hey, since you can't make it for the setup days, um, your sister is local and she was a competent person when we talked to her. So can we get her number? And so I went and I worked those days of setup and just a 2-day temp gig. I was like, sure, no problem. And then they wanted to offer me a job. And my sister said that I couldn't. It wasn't that it was taking her job. They wanted to add me as another employee to the office running the whole show. And she said that I couldn't do that. She said I couldn't take that job. I couldn't say yes to that. I could work for other people at the show, other areas of the show, but I couldn't work in the office. That was her space, and I can't work in her space. And I said, okay, I hear you, but you can't tell me to say no to a job offer.
Right.
And she stormed out of the room and called me a bitch. And we haven't spoken since. And then things got exacerbated when during COVID, I went to run an errand without my kids because that's what you do because babysitters don't exist and head counts do.
Right.
So I ran an errand without my kids. And she found out because same child who has the close relationship with her video called her on Messenger Kids, which became a thing at that time, and said, I don't know where my mom is. And I could have been in the bathroom or the backyard or talking to a neighbor or whatever.
Right.
But you're going to take a 4-year-old's word for it.
Yeah.
5-year-old. You're going to take a 5-year-old saying she doesn't know where her mom is. You're not going to contact the mom. You're just going to contact the police and tell them that I left my children unattended and send police to my house to do a wellness check.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
With the requirement that they call her back to report.
Yep.
And that's how I know that it was her because they had the last 4 digits of the phone number who had called.
Yep.
What they said was, do you have an ex who's trying to destroy your life? Do you have somebody who hates you? Because that's who does this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Any other concerned family member would talk to you about it.
Well,
but this is somebody who's trying to ruin your life.
Yep.
So yeah, she always spent a lot of time criticizing me for my parenting choices. Not that she has any experience herself.
Well, yeah, and that's
like
I totally get it. And well, even in my parenting I've had a lot of criticism over the last, especially this year, last 10 months. Not just on, well, parenting, but very judged by friends. I've lost a lot of friends this year
Yeah.
because of those things.
I'm sorry.
And well, I'm not, because I
What?
don't. I'm.
I mean, to a degree, if they're gonna let themselves out, then it's better that way for you.
Well, it is because one of my friends, it was 30 years, and um, they just couldn't have a conversation with me, a simple conversation.
Yeah.
And I've nurtured that relationship for 30 years, and I'm like, I missed something. Like, I can't even talk to my friends about this shit. Who am I going to talk to? And when I brought up the notion of suicide, it's, well, you're going to hell. You're a coward. You're going. I don't know how many times I heard I was going to hell. I'm like, what? You don't even know the whole story. Can we just have a conversation? And the whole thing was, at the time, I think I kind of explained this to you on the phone, that as I started telling my friends what I was going to do, because it made sense to me. It makes sense to me. Logically, it makes sense to me. But when they actually, a lot of them, it's a very uncomfortable thing. And nobody does this side of it. It says, hey, I know we're friends, but I'm going to go take my life, and I just want to say goodbye. And I want you to say goodbye. And in
Yeah.
doing that, I realized a few things. I realized I have people that actually love me. Because it's very easy to convince yourself that you're unloved, that you're not lovable, that you're not worthy, that you're not good enough, that you're not capable. And you start looking at your life and you're like, well, there's the evidence right there. This is what's happened, and this is what I've done, and this is actually what I've done with everything that's happened to me. And I haven't really done anything but fuck everything up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, but as you start telling people, and this is what I never thought I had anybody walking beside me. When you start telling people, like I told my pastor, he's been my pastor for 30 years. I am not a Christian, but I was in the Christian church for 15 years. And I became good friends with him and his family. And I realized he's always been there. He's always walked beside me. He's never judged me. When I went to tell him about this, he's like, I'll tell you what, I've never heard this, not in 40 years. This is new. Like, I don't even know what to do with this.
Yeah.
And he's like, I actually had to go talk to my mentor to figure out how to navigate through this. And
I mean, it was a similar thought process when you told me that on the phone. I was like, huh.
Yeah.
Never heard anybody have such a philosophical view on what they're going to do that they actually tell people clearly like this first. There's the panics of, well, I'm communicating this because I want helped out of it. And then there's
Right.
the, nope, actually, I just wanted to give you a heads up. Like, I'm totally cool with this. I'm going to do this.
You don't hear that.
No, that's not a thing.
That's
not a thing.
As I'm walking down this road and I start something,
I mean,
like this, that I would never ever do. It's just a fantasy thought, but now it's a reality, and it's like, okay, something's happening here.
right.
Am I still moving towards that dark decision? Yeah, but the lights starting to shine through, and yeah, one of my big things about this podcast is to try to find people like me, but also have people that have either gone through it or experienced it in some way or struggle with it, and they're doing something about it, and they come alongside the people that don't know what to do, the people that had the questions that they don't know where to go or how to make it, how to find life in the midst of walking in the shadow.
Yeah.
And I think you do that by having somebody walk beside you. My problem was I didn't recognize it. I've got some of the best friends, like up until 5 years ago, had terrible friends.
I mean, our society is not a comfortable one to live in.
No.
Everybody has so much that they have to do just to create their own lives that it often seems like we don't have time and space for each other
Right.
and we're disconnected from each other. And so then that's isolating. And for somebody who feels alone, then you just feel further alone of, nope, I really have to do this alone.
Yes.
And so, yeah, like people are there for you, but it's still very separate and disconnected.
So I struggle with low grade depression.
Mhm.
It's like a flat line of low grade depression all the time, and I think that's why. I think that's why I turn people away. I'm like, no, I'll just do it myself. I don't want to be rejected by you in the future, so I'm just going to do it myself.
Right. It's easier to prevent that
Yeah.
than to feel that rejection.
Yeah.
Yep.
And like I said, going back to losing my several friend groups this year, or friends. Um, yeah, it's not just a couple. It's been like back to back to back. Um, the thing is, I'm always part of that problem. I'm always part of that engagement. So I'm probably a good part of the problem, or at least part of the problem. And I just don't see it. Um, I'm not above admitting that, because I'm always trying to improve myself. But anyway, a little rabbit trail there.
Mhm. You know what? Self-awareness is not a bad thing.
No, it's not. And I don't think a lot of people do it enough.
No, people don't take time to
Yeah.
self-reflect and have introspection.
Yeah. And I'm not saying navel gaze, because that's what creates depression. Um, but definitely look at something and say, well, that's a problem. Okay, now I've recognized the problem. How do I fix the problem?
Mhm.
What's the solution? Because in general, if I can recognize a problem, I can do something about it. I can work on fixing it. Am I fixed? No. Do I have a lot of problems? Yeah, I just have a lot of fixing. So some people don't have that those blockades. That's why I'm curious about your brother. Was the because the upbringing wasn't bad, just some emotional abuse, some spiritual abuse.
Yeah, well, and my brother had been in and out of the church. M I'm gonna say not necessarily in and out of the church. He fluctuated in times of going to church and then not going to church.
Okay.
Um, and I mean, as a teenager in high school, living in our parents' house, there was a time that alcohol and chewing tobacco were found in his bedroom. So those are not Mormon things. So
Right.
he was thinking for himself and experimenting, and whether he was having internal conflicts about like the teachings that we were raised with of those things are bad and you're going to hell for it, um or if he had liberated himself from that thinking and just said, you know what, like people do things and that doesn't make me a shitty human. I don't I don't know. Um but he was definitely on and off with that. He was like he had a good relationship with my dad. My dad was an absolute asshole. Um Nobody wanted to hang out with him and do anything with him, and we kind of got the I always got that vibe from him myself of he didn't want to spend time with us. Um so it was a mutual feeling. But my brother was strongly bonded with him. We all knew that he was dad's favorite. And that wasn't a complaint because dad was an asshole, so
Right.
we didn't want to be with him anyway.
Right.
So but like they bonded on like um running and cycling. My dad was an avid runner and like probably a bit excessive with it. Like he was very judgmental over anybody that was not athletically inclined and had a soft belly, let alone um, any degree of obesity. He he always fat shamed me and my siblings. Um, so a lot of us came out with body image issues or maybe even to some degree some eating disorders.
Okay.
Was the golden child, and he could do nothing wrong. He never got in trouble for anything, and they just always bonded and connected over the running and cycling, and I guess that was what one had to do to get dad's favor and approval.
Yeah.
So to that degree, had a a good light on his time at home. Again, I don't know how he actually felt,
Well, it sounds like he had a
and what his
series of events.
experience was,
Yeah.
because um, he was 7 years older than me. So when he graduated and left home at 17, 18, that made me 10 or 11. Like,
Right.
we're not
Yep.
bonding and connecting and having conversations. We lived in different worlds. So I don't know what his actual experience was, but as far as like getting yelled at and having dad scold you for things all the time, that was not
really his experience.
not his experience. No.
Yeah, it sounds like he. So what I'm discovering, so I've struggled with this basically since I was 12 years old. But it's because of abuse and like severe, like sexual, emotional, spiritual, all of it.
Yeah.
Like if you can think of it, other than being sex trafficked, there's not much I haven't been through. So by the time I was 12, I was just broken.
Yeah.
I was shattered. And I don't know that those pieces have ever been put back together. I mean, I've been trying since I was 18 years old to put them back together, but it's haunting. It's been haunting for me. But what I'm discovering is not everybody gets to this point where I'm at with sometimes there's no trauma. Sometimes it's actually a good family.
Yeah.
Sometimes and there's just a detriment in the thought process, or something has triggered something to send you down a dark path. And it's like, and I always thought it was trauma induced, and I don't think it is necessarily. I think events sometimes happen that create despair for people, and it can be, mostly good for their life. And then these events happen and they can't find the way out.
Yeah.
So it becomes an emotionally charged decision. So yeah, that's where I kind of, just listening to you, it sounds like maybe he didn't have such a terrible, like traumatic upbringing. It was, well, the Marines, and then especially when you get involved in relationship and you get attached. It's creates emotional attachment, and then it gets stripped from you, and that, like, you don't feel like there's much to live for.
Yeah.
In a very, very short amount of time, which is crazy. Yeah, that's the detriment of, I think it's our society. I do.
Yeah.
But so why don't we get into marriage? When did you get married?
I was just a few weeks before I turned 21.
Well, that concludes this week's episode. Join us next week for the next story about her husband and the trauma and the trouble, what he left behind. Yeah. Thanks for listening. Again, if you do want to join our show, just email me at thesuicidemonk@gmail.com. Again, thanks for listening. Enjoy your day, and peace out.